We have a new moon and total solar eclipse happening on April 8th in the cardinal fire sign of Aries, just 1 week after Mercury goes retrograde in the same sign. Now, this eclipse's path of totality will also be going over Mexico, the United States, and Canada, which is a huge deal, really amplifying its influences on anyone living there. And with eclipses being known for their ability to usher in pretty noticeable and sometimes dramatic turns, closing of old doors, and flinging open new ones specifically, this one will be very distinct. Hello friends, it's your girl Alina, and in this video, we'll be covering the top 3 things that you need to know about this eclipse. And for the first time, I will be giving you a horoscope reading for all signs. I'm really excited about it. So if you're liking my video, you want to give me feedback, and if you want to support my work, then be sure to hit the like button on this. Also, I'm looking for a video editor, so be sure to check the video description to learn more if you're interested. And if you'd like an outline of this or future lunar horoscopes emailed to you directly, then be sure to click the link in my bio to sign up for my lunar newsletter. Now on April 8th, we will not just have a new moon, but we will also have a total solar eclipse happening at 19 degrees in the sign of Aries. So here are 3 things to know. The first thing to know is that this new moon will also be a total solar eclipse. Now within astrology, solar eclipses are seen as amplified versions of new moons. And considering that new moons are all about ushering in things like new chapters, it'll really be offering us the most potent day, and really the most potent period 5 days leading up to and 5 days following it, for starting fresh, resting, and reflecting in order to align and plan for the future that we seek. Now, this solar eclipse is a lunation that really creates incredibly fertile soil for starting something new, setting intentions, and not necessarily being in action, but really getting crystal clear on the direction that we want to take our lives moving forward. And what areas of our lives most potently this will be impacting is what I will be covering in your rising sign horoscope. Now, the second thing to know about this new moon and eclipse is that it will be happening at 19 degrees in the sign of Aries, as mentioned before. Now, Aries is a cardinal fire sign. It's the first sign of the zodiac. And when we see the new moon and eclipse occurring in this sign, it can definitely offer us an opportunity to set intentions and manifest and explore within the realms of Aries. So think of how you advocate for yourself or others, how you might take action in alignment with your intentions, and also the relationship that we have with our more fiery emotions like our passion and our anger. Now, the third thing to know about this Aries new moon and eclipse is the transits that will be happening at the time of it. So first, it'll be happening in the middle of Mercury retrograde, which began a week before this lunation. So Mercury, the planet of communication, learning, the internet, and travel, went retrograde on April 1st. And when we see any planet go retrograde, there can be this overarching theme of experiencing potential setbacks, hiccups, or mishaps, specifically within the realms of our lives that the retrograded planet influences, and involving aspects of our lives where we might karmically be ready or might be called to learn an important lesson. And I'll dive deeper into that when covering your specific rising sign as well. And getting even more specific, when we see that Mercury will be retrograde in the sign of Aries, this Mars-ruled sign of fire, action, and taking initiative, there can be a higher chance of this retrograde causing a potential sort of chaos and even some fiery temper tantrums over any retrograde setbacks that we experience as we go through this next few weeks. And on the other side of the coin, we might feel a lot more driven to maybe clean up any messes and learn or move on from lessons that this retrograde might highlight for us, because we feel a lot more ready and capable to face them. Especially because retrogrades can also tend to cause us to draw inward and sometimes even internalize things, for better or worse. This can also manifest as us being a bit harder on ourselves. So whether it shows up as maybe missing an appointment, someone else being late, having potential transportation issues, or misunderstanding the assignment that we might have had, in all of these situations, while they can feel frustrating, it will be really helpful to try to pause and ask ourselves if there's any lessons that there are to be learned in these mishaps. In general, this lunation and Mercury retrograde will be most strongly felt by the cardinal signs, so those being Aries, Libra, Cancer, and Capricorn, though they will be felt by everyone. If that's your sun, moon, or rising, pay attention, y'all. Two other notable transits that are happening around the time of this eclipse will include Mars conjuncting Saturn in Pisces, which can really bring this air of seriousness to our dreams and actions, really urging us to reflect on our long-term ideas and if we are taking aligned steps with those things, and if we are answering or stepping up to the call of really rising to the occasion of things that we are being called to do around this time. And this is really potent timing for this Mars-Saturn conjunction, considering that there are already present themes of ushering in new chapters and reflecting upon how we'd like to approach things moving forward into the new lunar cycle. So it can really add this air of seriousness, of duty, and of maturity around what we are focusing on. The next transit will be Venus in Aries sextiling Pluto in Aquarius, which can be very intense and transformative, especially when it comes to our relationships and exploring our value systems. And by the way, this video is sponsored by Auraline. Auraline is my company, and we not only produce astrology planners and wall calendars, but we are also hosting our first annual Auraline retreat in Thailand this June, and you are invited. So if you're interested in not only going on a retreat, but going in a group with like-minded astrology and spiritual growth-loving friends where you can participate in astrology workshops, morning sunrise meditations, in addition to all of these explorative activities of taking a Thai cooking class, snorkeling, going on hikes, kayaking in the ocean in the beautiful oasis of Thailand, then be sure to check the link in my bio to learn more. Okay, next, let's dive into how this eclipse will influence each sign. I always suggest for you to listen to your rising sign, but feel free to hop around and explore the others for your sun or moon if it feels right. Hello and welcome to my Aries sun, moon, and rising signs. So this eclipse and new moon in the sign of Aries will be transiting your first house of self-image, identity, new beginnings, and your physical health. And considering that this eclipse will be an amplified version of a new moon, transiting your first house of new beginnings and your sense of self, it definitely indicates that 5 days leading up to, 5 days following, and around the time of the eclipse, you might experience some things that kind of nudge you to really reflect on, namely, what comes to mind is limiting beliefs and your perspective of yourself, your identity. And this can manifest as a desire to maybe update your appearance, all the different ways that you might communicate who you are. You know, appearance is this nonverbal way that we communicate our interests and our personalities, right? Maybe it shows up as your hair or changing your clothes a bit, but it also can be very internal, especially considering that Mercury going retrograde in Aries will also be transiting your first house, really causing you to maybe internalize things a bit more and really have that deeper rooted reflection about things. So in terms of a potential new chapter or things that you can focus on that are really aligned at this time, reflecting on your thought process of like, what are your intentions for this new lunar cycle, maybe going into this new astrological year, you know, spring just started at the end of March, and exploring like if your image of yourself, what you're capable of, and really like the power that you hold within to actually align with your highest ideals, exploring like, what does that look like for you? Because I feel like, especially with an eclipse being so potent, really pushing us into new chapters in a lot of ways, this can show up as you exploring like, what are my limiting beliefs? Like, are my deeper rooted ideas aligned with what I actually want? And then also like, I feel like this is perfect for y'all, but exploring the concept of a growth mindset of like, if you have setbacks, like how can I look at it maybe being an opportunity to learn and grow? Speaking of which, let's dive into your Mercury retrograde sort of horoscope. So Mercury will be retrograde from the 1st to the 25th, transiting your first house. And so again, I feel like, especially around the time of this lunation, if you do feel or experience something that kind of nudges you towards reflecting on your self-image, your body, your physical health as well, you know, the engine that is you and how it moves through this world, and there being new beginnings in that space, you also might experience some setbacks, some mercurial sort of hiccups or stagnation, specifically within the very same realms that this lunation will be influencing. But I think that the biggest lesson for you, Aries sun, moon, and rising, will be to really pay attention to what any setbacks or hiccups or issues might be, if any, because they're always tied to a karmic lesson that we are being called to learn in order for us to grow. So if you think about a lot of the Mercury retrograde type hiccups that we're usually associated with, so that being miscommunications, making sure to spell check things in emails and text messages, making sure to pause and process before, jumping to conclusions, especially with this being in the sign of Aries. It's very fiery. Emotions can be very high for y'all. And it being in your first house, which is also connected to Aries, it will be very important to, if you experience any of these hiccups, transportation things, electronic things, backing all these things up. These are like the standard things that are associated with Mercury retrograde, making sure that you really pause to see if there's a lesson there that you're meant to learn. Next up, when we see that Mars will be conjuncting with Saturn in the sign of Pisces, that will be transiting your 12th house of the subconscious, your spirituality, your emotions, and healing. A lot of definitely aspects of healing and solitude. And so with that in consideration, around the time of this lunation, in alignment with this sort of theme of your sense of self and new chapters within that, considering that this will be in the 12th house, the end of the zodiac, you'll likely experience things that might usher you into or kind of spark the thought process for you in terms of healing, in terms of specifically taking your healing and your personal time of really processing things, processing your emotions, processing your intuition, taking it a lot more seriously. And that might show up as maybe you feeling called to kind of retreat, drawing your energy back to yourselves. This might also look like around this time, maybe if you're in therapy, having some breakthroughs there of like this deeper understanding of yourself, or maybe you might have an experience that makes you think, should I get into therapy? You know what I mean? Because when you see Saturn and Mars conjunct in this way, it brings this air of seriousness. It brings this air of responsibility and duty to the table. And considering that it's, transiting your 12th house, of your spirituality, of your imagination and these things, it can also manifest as like maybe you taking more seriously a lot of your passion and creative sort of endeavors, and really like there's definitely going to be an air of like, am I taking this seriously? Am I stepping up to the plate in that space? And finally, we'll see that Venus in Aries will be sextiling Pluto in Aquarius, transiting your 1st and 10th house. So I think that with that type of transit, it'll definitely be ushering in some type of potential experiences that could spark some transformation specifically within your relationships and your career, or like your status in some way, your status in society. And so I think that that will likely show up specifically maybe in your job, the relationships that you have in your job. We see Venus, the planet of love and relationships, Pluto, the planet of transformation and change, and Venus will be transiting your 1st house. That's influencing your sense of self, but also Pluto will be transiting your 10th house, which is all things Capricorn. So your career, your status, power, action, practicality. And so I think that there's definitely going to be themes within your career, and there being a potential change there, a potential shift there. And considering, the Mars Saturn transit having to do with your spirituality, that could be tied to it, in that it kind of causes you to maybe draw a way of like your sense of worth or your reliance on that, and draw that back to your personal life, your personal healing, your spiritual relationship with yourself and the divine, and not as much like over-reliance on that validation from outside of yourself. That's what I'm getting. And for my Aries Sun, Moon, and Rising friends, for Venus sextiling Pluto, that'll be happening in your 1st and your 11th house. So your 1st house of your sense of self, your identity, your physical health, and your 11th house of friendships, community, and innovation. And I think that there will definitely, I think it's very interesting because it's like there will be this transformation, that being the Pluto energy, happening within your relationships, specifically that will be influencing your sense of self and your community in some way. And paying attention to your relationships, what you might learn from them at this time. I think that that will be very potent, because I think that the things that you might learn from them will usher in this transformation. But overall, there will be this sort of change that you might feel, especially internally at this time. But that's your overall horoscope for my Aries Sun, Moon, and Rising people. Go ahead and comment down below if this resonates with you and if you like this video format. I'll see you in the next one. Hello, hello, my Aries, Sun, Moon, and Rising friends. This is your horoscope for the upcoming Aries new moon and eclipse and transit surrounding it. So first off, we see that this Aries eclipse and new moon will be transiting your 12th house of the subconscious, of your dreams, your spirituality, and your emotions, and namely your healing journey. Even like solitude. And so because we see that this new moon and eclipse is really this amplified version of a new moon and is really ushering in and initiating a new chapter, a new change in your life in some way, I think that that change will likely be showing up in your spiritual and your healing journey. You might experience something that really just makes you not question at all, like, okay, I need to be putting more energy into my personal healing journey, whether that's your mind, your body, or your soul, you know, your mental health, physical health, spiritual health. I think namely it'll likely show up more maybe as your spiritual health. But there's this air to that happening for you. And considering that it's in the sign of Aries, this sign that's very driven, go-getting, very like, let's take initiative. It's a cardinal sign. It's about starting things. I think that you definitely might experience something where you feel a lot more ready to take a new step within your more personal, your emotional development. This might show up spiritually, but this can also show up as like literally going to therapy. It might show up as having an experience where you have like this really intense or notable heart-to-heart with a loved one or friend where you finally sort of tap into something and you understand something in a different way that sort of initiates a new door opening, this new chapter within your relationship with yourself, with your shadow, and stuff like that. You know, the 12th house also involves karmic relationships. And I feel like there might be a new relationship coming in or one ending that's karmic and that is tied to your personal growth. All relationships are tied to our personal growth, right? Because we're all mirrors to one another. But what I mean by that is I feel like there might be a door closing in terms of like an older, maybe friendship or dynamic, relationship dynamic. And maybe through this sort of like spiritual or like this deeper psychological experience, you understand and you have this clarity of seeing either this older relationship or this newer relationship for what it is, of like, oh my gosh, like now that I understand myself better, I think I understand us better and like why I acted this way or why I felt so tied to this person in a certain way. So yeah, I think that this eclipse will definitely be influencing that very strongly. The other thing to consider, and you know, next up is that Mercury is retrograde and it's transiting Aries, and it will also be transiting your 12th house. So even though you'll be having, you know, this very potent eclipse new chapter sort of energy within your 12th house of your spiritual growth, of your emotional, physical, and sort of shadow, sort of healing and acknowledgement, you might experience hiccups within those exact realms, you know? So again, you know, Mercury going retrograde in the sign of Aries in general, it can show up as there being hiccups, stagnations, setbacks, specifically in the realms that Mercury influences. Definitely go back to the intro of this video to hear my sort of explanation for that. And so I think that for you, because it's transiting this same house, this 12th house as the eclipse, there can be a higher potential of there being setbacks within your healing process a little bit. You might notice little hiccups when you know, are trying to set that appointment with the therapist, or you're, you know, trying to really process things, or you're actually deciding to take that very cardinal Aries initiative to take these new steps in this new chapter. You might notice hiccups. And I just want to tell you that if you do notice them, it will likely be coming from the Mercury retrograde. But what's very constructive and sort of, a really constructive perspective of these potential setbacks is that they are tied to karmic lessons you are being called to learn. So it's like we're having this new window being open, this new door being open, but also potential setbacks of like almost like a stress test of like, are you ready though? Are you really ready? And so it'll be important to definitely pay attention to the classic sort of mercurial setbacks and any sort of issues that might happen. But especially if you notice that they happen within these realms of the 12th house of, you know, the relationship that you have with your shadow, the relationship that you have like karmically with people, where you know those people that you know, like, oh, I'm supposed to really learn a lesson here. Just know that all of those are tied to lessons that you're being called to learn right now. And it'll be really helpful to write them out and sit and process it. Like if you have something frustrating happen or a small little thing happen, don't hesitate to write it down and ask like, if this was a lesson from the universe, what might it be? Because those are the gems that are being dropped for you. And by the way, if you notice like a lighting change, we just had some rain and the clouds are moving around, and you know, it's just classic spring changing of the light and brightness throughout the day with the clouds. But anyway, next up, following the Mercury retrograde, we see that you will have Mars conjuncting Saturn in the sign of Pisces, transiting your 11th house of friendships, community, and innovation. And so, like mentioned before, you know, this Mars-Saturn transit is all about bringing an air of seriousness and also like feeling a lot more excited about taking action in alignment with your duties, being called to kind of like step up to the plate in a lot of ways. And considering that it will be transiting your house of friendships, community, and innovation, I think that around the time of this eclipse and with this transit, you might experience things that kind of spark this discussion with you and your friends or your community, or you internally involving your relationship with your community and your friends. Like, so how seriously do you take a friendship? Like, what does loyalty look like? I think that you might even have an experience where you're called to kind of like step up to the plate of like, oh no, that's my friend, I need to go help them, or no, that's my family members, no question asked, I'm dropping everything. There might be a calling for you to kind of like step up in a certain way, you know what I mean? And so yeah, like with this conjunction, the Saturn-Mars conjunction bringing this air of seriousness, specifically within your relationships and your community. This can also look like maybe something's going on, you know, globally or in your city or your town or in your state where you're like, oh my gosh, like without question, I need to go and help. Like, or how can I, you know, align my actions with the severity of what's happening right now? That's kind of the vibe that might manifest for you. You might in general also just feel this sort of like energized clarity around who it is you love and why you love them, and yeah, taking aligned steps with those feelings, because Saturn is all about like walking the walk. Like, does your walk match your talk? And because it's conjuncted with Mars, the planet of energy, the Sun, Moon, and Mercury will be in Aries. This is I think will be a very potent time of action for you, my Taurus, Sun, Moon, and Rising friends. And finally, Venus in Aries, sextiling Pluto in Aquarius around the time of this eclipse, I think will definitely be strongly influencing your spirituality, your emotions, and also your career. And I think that there will be some form of a transformation within those spaces, maybe specifically your relationships within your career, your relationships within whatever world that you might associate with your standing in society, like your image and how people perceive you collectively. And that likely will show up, you know, within career, I feel like for most of us, and, you know, especially when we associate like where we stand status wise. And I think that there might be a transformation there. I think it could look like maybe something happening or changing within your career and influencing your relationships, or something happening within your relationships influencing your career. But definitely pay attention to any shifts or changes that you see within those realms. Hello and welcome to my Gemini, Sun, Moon, and Rising friends. This new moon and eclipse happening in the sign of Aries will be transiting your 11th house of friendships, community, and innovation. And I think that with this, you know, eclipse being this amplified version of a new moon, really opening these new karmic doors, these new sort of portals for a brand new chapter in your life, if you're open to it, it will definitely be showing up in spaces. I think that you'll likely be experiencing something that will spark a potential change or shift internally when it comes to, yeah, your community, your friendships. And so I think that this will definitely be manifesting in your life in terms of when you're hanging out, when you're in community, when you're talking to friends. It's going to be through those relationships. I think that you might have new friendships, new communities coming in. You might, around the time of this 5 day leading up to 5 days following it, you might be invited to something, or you might go to something, or you might have an experience with a person that I think specifically shows you what the possibilities are. It kind of acts as this window of what could be. And I think that around this time, you might feel this calling, this Aries sort of like driven cardinal sign being in action calling to actually respond to the calling, actually dive deeper and go deeper into that, and sort of follow the path that these experiences reveal for you. My Gemini, Sun, Moon, and Rising friends, I know that, I'm Gemini sun and moon. So I know that there's an aspect of us that really loves to learn, that really loves to socialize and connect in certain aspects of our lives. And I think that during this time, we might see brand new friendships and relationships coming up. I think that also because this is transiting your 11th house, it can also show up as like really new, innovative, progressive ideas coming about within you. And I think that they could involve your community, but I think that it will be helpful to lean into your community, lean into your friendships, your networks, your family, maybe getting new perspectives on any new ideas that you have and utilizing that. Because around this time, because it's transiting this house, it's really charging up a lot of the potential for expansion and luck within that space for you. On the flip side, there can also be relationships that are kind of closing to kind of create space for this new chapter for you as well. There's this karmic air to eclipses where things are usually like, if there's anything that's been lingering, it's being kind of pushed out. If there's anything that you kind of have felt being built up when it comes to your connection to others, or maybe the things that you're learning and the inspiration that you have, this eclipse is boom, pushing you forward. So really pay attention to that. Also considering that Mercury will be retrograde in the sign of Aries, also transiting your 11th house, that means that a lot of the maybe inspiration and action that you might be feeling called to take within these realms of your life might also come with some baggage. They might also come with some karmic lessons. And what I mean by that is, like, if you imagine yourself, you're walking through a new door, you're feeling inspired, you see this like window of possibility for yourself in some way. There's this spark, there's this vision that you have. You're walking over and you might trip. That sort of like bump in the road or that stagnation will be tied to Mercury retrograde. But as mentioned before, as with all retrogrades, any stagnation, setbacks, or internalization that we might feel at this time, it's tied to karmic lessons. And the lessons that you are being called to listen to right now, my Gemini sun, moon, and rising friends, all involves the 11th house of your relationships, your friendships, your community, and how and maybe being called to think outside of the box in new ways. Like maybe you've been trying the same things in your friendships, or when it comes to trying to pour into your community or receive from your community. And right now with Mercury retrograde, you might experience some hiccups that are calling you to try something new. Like, especially this is a new moon, ushering in a new approach, a new chapter, a new energy. And so if you do experience any sort of hiccups, stagnations, or anything like that, it'll be really, really helpful to pause and really write it out. Like really write out, okay, I noticed that this happened today and it was a small little hiccup, or maybe it was a big one. What is the lesson there? Like, especially, given the context of the house that it's transiting, the fact that also, sun, moon, and Mercury will be in Aries, this very driven cardinal sign of like being a go-getter, really initiating things. There also might be a bit of anger because it's, transiting Aries. So again, pausing to process and ask yourself if there's lessons there will be really helpful. Next up, we see that Mars will be conjuncting with Saturn in the sign of Pisces, transiting your 10th house of career, public image, and your ambition. And when we see that Mars and Saturn come into a conjunction, there's this air of seriousness, of aligning your actions with your responsibilities and your duties, of stepping up to the plate, you know what I mean? Of answering the calling. There's this air of, you said you wanted to do this, here it is. And so considering that it'll be transiting your 10th house, this will be really involving your career, your public image. Like I said, maybe I think that it'll likely be initiating or ushering in a potential experience when it comes to work where maybe you've had these goals at your job. Maybe you've said that I really, I want that raise, or I want that promotion, or I want to do this new different thing. And I think that again, with this being a new moon, there might be this ushering in of this opportunity for you to do it, but there's a lot of more responsibility that comes with it. Again, 10th house also has to do with ambition, having goals, being very practical about them, and that practicality piece, especially because it's tied to Saturn, and Saturn being this planet of responsibility, it's considered the strict teacher. It's like, I have a lesson for you, but you might not be happy how you learn it, but it's important for you to learn the lesson. There's that air to it as well. So considering that you're, having this new chapter, especially with community, with friendships, with how you innovate things, there also being potential setbacks within those realms with Mercury retrograde. considering that Mars and Saturn will be conjunct in Pisces transiting this house, I think that it'll be really important to take it seriously. Take whatever happens in your job, whatever happens, like especially with your ambition, if you have any intentions that you want to set for the new moon, take it seriously. Like really sit and ask yourself, like, do my actions align with the type of person that I want to become, especially when it comes to my ambitions and my goals for my life or my career? Like, you might experience things maybe with your boss or your colleagues where that sparks that conversation within you. So really pay attention to that if it shows up, and understand that if there's something tough going on, it might be a calling to ask you, like, do you want to actually step up to the plate? Do you actually want to rise to the occasion? Or maybe do you want to take a step back and really process if, is this the path that you want to take? Either way, this new moon will be offering a lot of clarity around this time. And finally, we'll see that Venus will be sextiling Pluto, and this will be activating your 11th house, of friendships, community, innovation, but also your 9th house of expansion, all things expansion. So think like expansion of your mind through education and learning, but also expansion of maybe your spirituality, your morals, your ethics. And because we see that Venus, the planet of love and relationships, will be having this, sextile with Pluto, the planet of transformation and change, you might experience a bit of change or something that happens having to do with, or, having to do with your relationships and with your thinking process. And I think that considering that this new moon is also in your 11th house, and there's a lot of stuff activating your friendships and what you learn through your community and your friendships, I think that you might notice a change within your relationships. You might notice a change in maybe being really drawn to somebody who can help you grow, or maybe you notice that you're helping somebody else transform, especially in their perspective or their relationship with their spirituality, and maybe something like that. You can also see some travel happening. There might be changes to your travel, especially with Mercury being an air sign and it ruling over aspects of travel. There can be hiccups there. So definitely pay attention to those things at the time of this new moon. I hope you enjoyed this reading. And if you did, be sure to hit the like button and come back for the next one. I also did a week ahead reading for the 1st through the 7th of April. So if that interests you, be sure to check out the video. Hello, my Cancer, Sun, Moon, and Rising friends. This new moon and eclipse in Aries will be activating your 10th house of career, public image, and ambition. So considering that this new moon will be ushering in a really potent karmic change, a new chapter in a lot of ways. It's seen as an amplified version of a new moon, and it'll happen within, within the realms of your life of like how the greater world or the public perceives you, your sense of sort of status in the world, and your career. I think that it'll likely manifest as something happening in your life that might change things. You might be changing careers. You might be changing what you're doing within your career. You might be noticing that you feel this like spark of excitement to maybe start a side hustle, or maybe you might be feeling called to draw away from all of those things. Either way, you will likely be experiencing something in your life that sparks a perspective shift when it comes to what your ambitions are in life, especially when tied to your job or what it is that you draw a sense of duty or a sense of worth from, basically. And because, eclipses are very karmic, they can really usher in new relationships, old relationships. Considering that this will be in the sign of Aries, there will be this sense of drive that you might have when it comes to getting things done or shifting things, maybe rearranging things a bit in a practical way when it comes to those aspects of your life. And considering that, Mercury will be retrograde, also transiting the same house of career, ambition, and your public image, there will also likely be a bit of, hiccup, stagnation, or slowdowns when it comes to your career or the things that you're sort of like putting that energy into for this new chapter. But have heart. The best way that I can, an analogy that I like to do to explain this as is like, you have this doorway and it's being flung open for you. Maybe you see this like window of opportunity, or you have this like spark of like what could be, around the time of this lunation, 5 days leading up to, 5 days following it. And you're like, you know what? I have this Aries drive that's happening in the sign of Aries, and I'm like ready to really take this step with intention. And maybe you experience some hiccups along the way. Maybe you're walking through the door and there's, a rock right there and you trip over it, or like, a chair that you didn't see and you're like, oh my gosh, like I need to move this stuff around. Those things are sort of a representation of Mercury retrograde, and that you might have these sort of hiccups or stagnations, but it's important to remember that they are karmically tied to lessons that you were being called to learn within those realms. And I think that that's why this lunation for all signs will be so potent, because we're having these karmic lessons being spotlighted in the same place that this new moon is spotlighting for us, to have, to potentially like start something fresh or let go of something in order to start this new cycle in our lives. And so for you, my Cancer, Sun, Moon, and Rising friends, it'll be really helpful to write down, document if you notice any hiccups within those realms, and really sit and ask yourself, is there a lesson here? Am I being called to kind of pay attention to this for one reason or another? Because when you think about it, like a lot of the sort of common mercurial hiccups, say there's a hiccup with travel, maybe there's an issue with my car, maybe I sent it, there was a typo in my email, or I miscommunicated something, or I misinterpreted something. These are all tied to like mistakes that we made, and they're pretty preventable mistakes. The other thing that I want to say is that retrograde and retrograde season isn't necessarily something to be afraid of. Not everybody experiences the same intensity of hiccups, if any at all, because they're tied to lessons that we are called to learn. And if you maybe have already learned a lot of these lessons and you feel like, no, I have my ish together in terms of my career and, taking aligned steps with my ambitions in life. And, I feel like I feel at peace with my public status, or where I am, or where I sit within the totem pole of work or within society or whatever, then you might not even experiencing anything intense. So don't be too afraid of that, my Cancer friends. We also see that Mars will be conjuncting with Saturn in the sign of Pisces, and that'll be transiting your 9th house of your spiritual, philosophical, personal growth. Think all things expansion, like expansion of self, expansion of awareness, and also things like travel, because through travel, you're also expanding your world. Considering that Mars, having this conjunction with Saturn can bring this air of seriousness, of duty, of stepping up to the plate, of rising to the occasion, it'll likely manifest for you, my Cancer, Sun, Moon, and Rising friends, as maybe something happening that makes you kind of revisit, like, what is it that I believe spiritually? What is it that I feel most aligned with morally, ethically? What is it about maybe my studies, and maybe even my plans for travel? And am I taking aligned steps with that? You might even experience an opportunity of expansion, of expanding those things in your life. And because Saturn is at play, and Mars, when they come together, there's very much this air of like being called to take action in alignment with your responsibilities and the lessons in your life that you've been called to learn. And so I feel like for you guys, it'll likely show up as maybe you have an opportunity, or maybe something happens where you're actually, for example, there could be a big moment where you're like, oh my gosh, I haven't really prayed in a while, but I might feel called to pray right now. Or maybe I haven't tried to tap into source energy, or been in stillness in nature, or I haven't really like explored those things in a while, and I'm being called to kind of step up to the plate in that. Maybe you might have somebody in your life who's asking you questions. Maybe they're asking you to be the mentor, or you to provide the information. Or maybe you have a mentor and they're asking you to like answer these questions. Let's see how much you know about this, And so I feel like there is going to be a sort of like, around the time of this eclipse, there'll be new chapters and new changes, especially with your career, and potential hiccups there with Mercury retrograde. There'll be like a stress test in those spaces, but I think that there also will be a stress test in terms of, are you ready to expand your understanding of things? Are you ready to expand your awareness in a serious way? Like actually take it seriously, especially if maybe you've been dabbling in spiritual studies, philosophical studies, dabbling in travel, dabbling in anything that has to do with expanding your awareness. Saturn conjuncting Mars in the sign of Pisces, this very spiritual sign as well, Pisces, I think can potentially spark within you like, oh, you've been dabbling in it, but like, what do you know about it? Do you want to dive deeper into it? I think there might be an opportunity presented there for you, my Cancer, Sun, Moon, and Rising friends. And finally, we'll see that Venus will be sextiling Pluto, activating your 10th house, again, of public image, career, things like that. And I have notes right here. It'll also be activating your 8th house of investments, intimacy, and secrets. And I think that because, you know, with Venus sextiling Pluto, it really is generally the type of transit that really calls for you to bring up honesty, because there's going to be changes happening in the relationship, or potential changes. And what I mean by that is, with there being transformation in relationships in general, with there being shifts and changes, you might be asked to dive deeper into that relationship, into relationships in general. And considering that this will likely be involving aspects of your career, aspects of like professionalism in general, aspects of investments. Also, you know, the 9th house heavily involves relationships as well, intimacy, secrets. I think that for my Cancer, Sun, Moon, and Rising friends, you might experience some secrets being revealed for sure. And specifically changes in your relationships, and that might involve your career. I think that there's just like a lot of energy having to do with your career. There potentially being hiccups, there potentially being revelations, but ultimately there being a new chapter coming forward for you during this new moon. So that concludes my reading for you guys. If you like this, be sure to hit the like button. And I also have a new video that I released just the other day that's for the week ahead. I decided to start this new series, so be sure to look out for those videos that will be coming out like every Sunday, I want to say, where it's like a weekly horoscope. So yeah. Hello and greetings to my Leo, Sun, Moon, and Rising friends. So we'll see that this new moon and eclipse will be transiting your 9th house of spiritual growth, philosophical growth, travel, and education. And so considering that this new moon is all about ushering in this new moon and eclipse being an amplified version of a new moon, offering this karmic sort of doorway, this new chapter of, you know, unlimited potential for you, specifically in this house, I think that it'll likely manifest as there being potential opportunities for you to travel, potential opportunities for you to just expand your awareness, expand your world in a lot of ways. And I think that you might even meet people who spark that within you. I think that you might meet people who do, but this new moon for you will be all about your relationship with learning, with expanding things. You might have felt called to, you might have noticed like, ooh, I feel like I'm paying, I think it's called like the ignorance tax. Ignorance tax is a term that I've heard like in the entrepreneurial world, and it's basically this phrase that describes like when you start a new business or a new project or anything, and it's like you got to be going, and if you're ignorant to certain things that you should be knowing, like maybe because you're not educated in it, you're paying a tax, and that you're being charged, or you're having to deal with the consequences of not understanding, like, oh, for example, like a tax write-off type thing, like, oh man, like if I had known that, I could have saved a lot of money, right? And so what I mean by that for my Leo, Sun, Moon, and Rising friends, around the time of this new moon, 5 days leading up to, 5 days following it, and on the day, you might have already noticed like that there are certain things that it would benefit for you to learn more about. It would really benefit, maybe that has to do with your career, maybe it has to do with like your relationship dynamics of like, maybe if I went to a therapist or read more about relationship psychology, or learn more about my friend or this person specific sort of personality type, or maybe if I learn more about the spiritual practice that I've been trying to understand, I'd be more grounded in it, or things like that. You might have noticed that leading up to this lunation. And because there's this karmic doorway, this karmic new chapter that you can start right now, there's a potent opportunity within your 9th house realms of spiritual growth, philosophical growth, exploring your morals, you know, really exploring and understanding, really expanding your understanding of things. And I think that there also might be some things around loyalty and around consistency for you as well, my Sun, Moon, and Rising Leo friends. So it'll be really potent and really a beautiful time to explore those things and explore maybe set intentions within those realms. But it's also important to remember that Mercury will be retrograde, also transiting your 9th house of spiritual, philosophical, mental growth. You know, travel is all about expanding your world. And so when we look at the general sort of mercurial hiccups that we should expect with a Mercury retrograde, those being like miscommunication, misspelling something in an email, you know, needing to double check things, maybe issues with our electronics, misinformation online, you know, all things that have air, travel. Mercury also influences that. And considering that it's in the 9th house, that also involves travel, also involves learning, and expanding our awareness. I think that it'll be really important to write down if you notice any hiccups and understand that those are lessons specifically within those realms, in this very same realm that the new moon is also influencing, asking you to grow within and maybe start something new within for yourself. So I think that that's really interesting. And the sort of analogy that I like to give is that this new moon and eclipse is like this cosmic doorway, this sort of window, this sort of like image or vision of what could be, specifically within these realms of expanding your awareness and your understanding of things, learning, educating yourself, and how that expansion can help you long term. And you're on your way. You want to go through this door, but there's some furniture in the way. There's a mess that you were supposed to clean up and maybe you forgot to. And that lesson is, and you're tripping over and it's slowing you down a bit. And all you need to do is clean it up. It's not the end of the world, but there's a mess there. And that mess represents Mercury retrograde, in that you might, experience a hiccup or stagnation or a setback within those same realms of, that image that you want to get to. But these are all of these hiccups that you might experience or you might not even experience are tied to karmic lessons that you are being called to understand. And so again, with that analogy of like, there's this stuff that you knew you were supposed to clean, and if you cleaned it, it would have been a clear runway, right? That's the way that I like to describe the Mercury retrograde transiting your 9th house, the same house as this new moon. So don't be afraid. Again, like if you feel like you've already learned a lot of these lessons, or you feel relatively whole or excited or aligned with the aspects of yourself of learning, of education, maybe you're already in the middle of school, maybe you already have taken steps to expand your awareness in some ways, and you're like, I don't feel like I need to change those things. This Mercury retrograde might not be that intense for you over the course of 25 days. It ends on the 25th of April. So don't be too afraid, but understand that if you do have any experiences there, it's all about pausing, writing it down, processing, because these are the gems that the universe are dropping right now specifically. And so if you're able to document them, it can be helpful. Maybe you don't need to document them, but just take note, take pause, and reflect on like, should I have already been doing that? Okay, now I know. Next up for my Leo, Sun, Moon, and Risings, we will also see that the moon will be the moon will be conjuncting with Saturn in the sign of Pisces and will be transiting your 8th house of investments, intimacy, and secrets. And so in general, like I explained in the beginning of this video, with Saturn conjuncting Mars, it brings in this air of seriousness, this air of duty. When you see them come together, it can really sort of spark experiences that make us realize like, ooh, I'm being called to step up to the plate. I'm being called to rise to the occasion. You know what I mean? And I'm called to take aligned steps, be in action with what I say I want, with what I say I care about, with what I say I believe. And considering that it's in this pretty, observant and serious house, 8th house of investments. First off, investments that they don't necessarily mean like finances. They mean like maybe long-term investments. It could show up as like financial stuff for you. It could also, I think that it likely will show up not only in investments, but maybe who you're investing in, who you're investing with. So it could be like actual financial type investments, but it can also be like, I've been investing into this relationship over here, and maybe you're being called within the relationship or something like that to like take it more seriously. You're being called to like, maybe you, I think it could also show up as, are you actually like taking this seriously when it comes to putting energy into something? Because when you're investing in something, you're putting either money, time, energy into it. And so that's a big deal. And so with Mars conjuncting Saturn, it's asking, it's initiating or sort of ushering in experiences where you're being called to ask, like, are you serious about this thing that you're drawing your energy to, that you're putting your energy into? And if you are, because this involves Mars, the planet of action, it's the ruling planet of Aries, this eclipse is in the sign of Aries. There's a lot of energy and seriousness, drive that can be put into these things that you care about, these investments, whether they be, physical or in your relationships. And yeah, I just, in general, just look out for 5 days leading up to 5 days following, you being asked to be sort of step up to the plate when it comes to your investments. Hello and greetings to my Virgo, Sun, Moon, and Rising friends. This will be your reading for the new moon happening it'll be transiting your 8th house of investments, intimacy, and secrets. And considering that, new moons or eclipses are amplified versions of new moons, we're seeing that there's this like doorway being opened for a new chapter if you're excited or interested or feeling called to step into that new chapter. And maybe if you're exploring or looking for intention setting where you want to focus that energy on, that will be most influential. It'll be within your 8th house of investments. And the thing about investments is that it's not necessarily like finances, like more immediate financial stuff. That's what the 2nd house rules. It's about where you're placing your time, your energy, your emotions, like where are you investing that, especially when it comes to your relationships. And I think that because this eclipse being this amplified version of a new moon, I think that like the best analogy that I have for it is that it's going to be almost like this cosmic doorway, this like window, this glimpse of what could be specifically within your investments. Maybe you have this opportunity or this thing that's being presented to you of like, if you invest in this right now, this could be a big deal. It could be things like investing in property, buying a home. It could be investing in stocks, even crypto type stuff. It could be investing in your relationships, being called to look at just all things that you're pouring your energy into and what you feel is worthy of your time and energy. And there's this new opportunity, this new chapter that it can be in terms of those things, in terms of your intimate relationships, in terms of, you know, the hidden, the shadow side also of yourself, of diving deeper into that, understanding yourself to give more context to those intimate relationships. You know, like how when you go a little really deep in a relationship, whether it's a friendship with family, you're opening up to people and it goes real deep and you're like, ooh, you're kind of triggering me because that's tapping into a shadow aspect of myself. These are the themes of this new moon, and there's going to be a new chapter, a new opportunity there for you to step into something new within that space. And I think that's what's going to show up. But it's important to remember that Mercury will be retrograde in the sign of Aries, also transiting the same house. Considering that, if you'd imagine the new moon being this new opportunity, this window of opportunity, you're like ready to walk through it. You know, there's this karmic beginnings, karmic endings happening right now to be paying attention to, and you're walking in that direction, you know, and you're walking through the doorway, right? But there's all this furniture in the way. There's all this like clothes in the way. And these are things that you were supposed to clean. You know you were, and you're tripping over it to get to that doorway. That's kind of the best way that I can explain Mercury retrograde happening at the same time, in the same house, in the same sign. And that at the same time that you have this window to start these new things, or you kind of feel this new inspiration, or 5 days leading up to 5 days following this eclipse, there might be mercurial Mercury retrograde setbacks or hiccups or stagnation, and it might make you feel frustrated because it's in the sign of Aries. It's important to remember that these are lessons. Like in this analogy, the lesson here was I was supposed to clean that. Like we know we were supposed to clean that, and now there's no way around it. Like I want to go down this path, but there's this stuff in the way. And so my lesson here was to clean. And so in that same way, if you notice any sort of stagnation, hiccups, or setbacks having to do with 8th house themes of your investments, of your shadow side, of getting intimate in your relationships, have heart. Understand that they're tied to karmic lessons that you're being called to understand right now, called to draw your attention to, that maybe in previous retrogrades, maybe you didn't learn. And understand that they're all tied to your overall evolution, your overall ascension, your overall growth. Now, the other thing that'll be helpful will be to write these things down. Really pause to take note. That'll be super helpful. And yeah, man, Virgo, Sun, Moon, and Rising, this eclipse will definitely be all about relationships, because we also see that Mars will be conjuncting with Saturn in the 7th house of relationships, of balance, of justice, you know. Think of the scales, Libra, you know, like that's the 7th house. And when you consider that Mars conjuncting Saturn brings an air of seriousness to things, especially around the time of this lunation, that's already around the themes of intimacy, of our shadow self, facing that and how it relates to our intimate relationships, of our investments, who we're investing in, what we're investing in, and those influences. Considering that context, because Mars is a planet of seriousness. It's a planet of action, aggression, dominance. Saturn is a planet that's considered to be the strict teacher. It's all about lessons that we're being called to learn. And sometimes those lessons aren't, you know, the funnest lessons, but they're lessons nonetheless. And so when they come together, there's this theme of how are you taking steps that are in alignment with your duties, what you are being called to step to the plate for. And so considering that this is transiting your 7th house of relationships, there's definitely going to be, you already know what I'm about to say, there will likely be things happening with your friendships, your community, your intimate relationships, romantic relationships, platonic ones, where it's kind of like you're being asked to step to the plate. It's kind of, you might have an experience where it's like, no questions asked. Oh my gosh, something's happening with my friend and I need to show up. Like, you don't even think about it. It's like, I'm stepping up to the plate. I'm being called to take action. I'm being called to rise to the occasion. This can also show up as maybe you have a relationship dynamic where you want to take it to the next level. You want to dive deeper. You want to get more intimate in a lot of ways, start that new chapter of diving deeper, of facing some shadows, maybe working through some stuff so that you're even stronger together, that relationship is even more intimate. And this Saturn-Mars conjunction is asking you, like, oh, you want to do that? You want to go to the next level? All right, here are the aligned steps that you need to take to do that. Here's the lesson, and here is your calling to actually be in action. And I really can't emphasize the aspect of being in action more, despite this being a new moon, and new moons are a time of rest. It's going to be transiting the very active sign of Aries. Aries is ruled by Mars, you know what I mean? So definitely look out for that, my Virgo sun, moon, and rising friends. And finally, we'll see that Venus will be sextiling Pluto, and this will be activating your 8th house, again, of investments, intimacy, secrets, things like that, your shadow side, but also your 6th house of balance, routine, structure, and accountability, things like that. And so considering that, Venus in general, with Venus sextiling Pluto, that's really a transit that is bringing in a lot of transformation within your relationships. And so again, there's this theme of like intimacy, of this change. I think you might notice big changes within your relationships, your friendships, and a lot of it having to do with, especially with this also activating your 6th house, this change might also be tied to, like, again, like your responsibility. I feel like you're going to have an experience that is going to really have you call into question, oh, I don't have the routine or the balance that I thought I did, or like really bringing that awareness to that, and how your sense of organization and your personal balance, your personal accountability, like who you are by yourself, is going to be sort of having a spotlight. Like, people in your life are going to be like flashing a light up in there, because there's going to be potential situations where you're kind of realizing like, oh, I need to work on that, on myself, on my shadow, on my personal stuff. And then that's going to help the relationship. Like, I've been focusing on everything outside of myself, but maybe I need to be focusing on what's going on internally. That's what I have for y'all, for my Virgo sun, moon, and rising friends. Be sure to comment down below if, closer to this lunation, if you notice that these things come up for you, if you feel like this is accurate at all. And then also, I started a new series where I'm doing weekly forecasts now. I'm trying to post them every Sunday, and I'm really excited about it. I did a recent one, so be sure to check that out. And yeah, I'll see y'all in the next reading. Hello, my Aries sun, moon, and rising friends. So this will be your horoscope for the new moon and eclipse. And so considering that this new moon and eclipse will be in the sign of Aries, this cardinal sign, y'all are cardinal signs, you'll be feeling this pretty potently, and it'll be transiting your 7th house of friendships, relationships, balance within relationships, and justice. And considering that this new moon is like this cosmic, karmic new chapter, it's not just any new moon, it's an amplified version of a new moon. And new moons are all about, intention setting, but also like having potential experiences that motivate you to maybe start something new or kind of leave something behind. But there's a new karmic chapter happening that's starting right now, and that will be building over the next few months. And it specifically will involve your relationships. So 5 days leading up to the day of, 5 days following, you might experience things that happen that maybe make you call into question some of your relationships. Sometimes what I'm feeling is like specifically accountability within your relationships. This will either be with like highlighting things within your friendships or new friendships that maybe spotlight for you of like, are you taking accountability of the part you play? Again, like the 7th house is all about like justice, the balancing of scales in terms of, sort of law and order type things, of accountability within relationships, of balancing relationships, making sure that everybody feels good and happy and comfortable, seen, acknowledge, all of those things. And I feel like because this is a new chapter, this new moon, you might have an experience that involves those things. You also might notice that you might feel called to point out to other people like, hey, are you being accountable for what you're doing? You might notice that as well. There's definitely just going to be themes of like working through some things potentially with people. And this new chapter will definitely be offering you the potential of stepping into a new phase in relationships, maybe with new people, where things feel a lot more equitable. Okay. And the thing is that, you know, with any relationship, with growth within a relationship, that often literally requires uncomfy conversations, uncomfy feelings. You know what I mean? So don't shy away from that, especially considering that Mercury will be transiting Aries also in your 7th house of relationships, of accountability and balance within your relationships and things like that. The way that I like to describe this new moon and this eclipse, the sun, moon, and Mercury being in the sign of Aries transiting all the same houses for you, is it's kind of like there's this new doorway opening 5 days leading up to the day of 5 days following, where you might notice this sort of like window, this sort of glimpse of what could be. There will likely be an experience that makes you think about your relationships, your growth, and the balance within your relationships. And you might feel like, okay, there's this new opportunity for this new chapter. Like, I'm ready. Like, maybe like I see more clearly the steps that I need to take to maybe start this new chapter within this space. And that's the doorway, right? The eclipse is the doorway. And then Mercury retrograde is like all of this junk, you know, like this furniture and clothes and random things that are in the way that are blocking your path, you know, creating this for sort of hiccup or stagnation or slowdown in your path to this new chapter. But in this sort of analogy, you immediately know, okay, like this setback, it's tied to a lesson, and the lesson is that I needed to clean up my stuff. Like, I needed to clean it up. It's very clearly what the problem is. And that's the best way that I like to describe this Mercury retrograde that's going to be happening over the next 25 days, in that if you have hiccups, don't be afraid, don't be worried, because they're karmically tied to lessons that you're being called to learn. And considering that it will be in Aries, will be transiting your 7th house, these lessons that you're being called to learn are involving your relationships. They're involving, you know, looking at the part that you play in things, and not just like, oh, I did something bad, but also looking at like what you've been allowing. You know what I mean? The dynamic that you might have been co-creating. And sometimes it has nothing to do with you. You know, sometimes it's like this clarity that's like, ooh, I'm so excited to be in a peaceful relationship or have this peaceful dynamic, and my stagnation is this person that I've been allowing to like suck out my energy, that I've been allowing to do this, or that I've been allowing to maybe feel confused and I haven't been offering clarity to them. There's going to be potent lessons there for my Libra sun, moon, and rising friends. So yeah, be aware of that. I'm looking at the transit. So we also see that Saturn and Mars will be in conjunction. And that will be in Pisces. So that'll be transiting your 6th house of, I have notes, your inner and outer balance, your sense of responsibility, and your routines, like your personal structure. And considering that Mars and Saturn coming into conjunction in general can bring an air of seriousness, an air of like a sense of duty, an air like it's a type of transit that can definitely sort of cause experiences that make you feel like, oh, I need to step up to the plate. I need to be a lot more serious about this thing. It can definitely spotlight, am I taking aligned actions with my intentions or with my responsibilities, like the things that I have promised other people? And I think that because it's transiting your 6th house, it has all to do with your inner and outer balance, that being like, what are your routines? Like, how are you nourishing yourself? What does structure look like in your life? There's an air of seriousness to those aspects of your life. I think that around this time, you also might experience something maybe having to do with your health, having to do with your personal life, where, you know, you're realizing like, oh, I need to kind of get this stuff in order. On the flip side, you also might just experience a sense of vigor, like an energized feeling of like feeling excited to dive deeper into maybe like how you organize your home. Maybe you really want to do some spring cleaning, or maybe you in your relationships when it comes to balance, again, going back to the 7th house transits of Sun, Moon, and Mercury at this time, there's definitely this sense of duty of like, you know what? I want to show up for myself. How am I showing up for me? You know what I mean? And I think that considering that all of these transits all have to do with relationships with others and with ourselves, I think that for my Virgo, Sun, Moon, and Rising friends, a big lesson that you might experience is, wow, like how am I pouring into me? How am I pouring into myself? And how does that influence these relationships? You know what I mean? Like, how deep am I going with myself? And finally, we see that Venus will be sextiling Pluto, and that'll be activating your 7th house, but also your 5th house. I'm reading, sorry. But also your 5th house of your inner child, your self-expression, parent-child dynamics, and your creativity. And so in general, you know, Pluto and Venus having the sextile, it's all about changes and transformation, evolution within your relationships. And so considering that this will be activating your 7th house of relationships, but also your 5th house of like your inner child, I think that there might be a form of transformation within your, within relationship dynamics that influence or will be connected to how you express yourself, how you show up, how you have courage. I think that overall there's going to be a lot of lessons having to do with your relationships, how you express yourself, how you show up as yourself. Like, are you maybe stifling yourself? Are you around people who are stifling you? Are you stifling your truth? Is that harming the balance within your relationships? There's going to be a lot of that going on. And so really taking note of any lessons that you experience at this time and being open to a new chapter of new possibilities of like, what does it look like for there to be balance, for there to be equitability, for you to co-create with others, safe spaces to really allow your inner child to flow through. There will be a lot of transformation there if you're open to it. That concludes my reading for y'all for this new moon and eclipse. And if you liked it, be sure to hit the like button. And also I started a new series of like weekly forecast videos. I don't know how long it's gonna last. I don't know if I'm gonna continue doing it. I don't know how it'll look, but I just wanna let y'all know about it because you should check out the video. But with that said, I will see you in the next one. Hello and greetings to my Scorpio sun, moon, and rising friends. This will be your new moon and eclipse horoscope. And this eclipse will be transiting your 6th house of inner and outer balance, personal health, personal responsibilities, and routines. So this will definitely be activating an aspect of your life and really potentially initiating or sparking experiences that might call you to really reflect on, how do I nourish myself? Like, how am I pouring into myself in terms of like showing up in a balanced way? Like, what are the structures or routines in my life that have and haven't been working for me? And how has that shown up in my life? And I feel like this new moon is like this, especially because eclipses are amplified versions of the new moons. It's like this karmic doorway, this karmic opportunity for starting a new chapter within those realms, within that relationship with yourself of like how you are creating balance in your life and the maturity that you're bringing into dynamics of what are my routines. Think of like things like spring cleaning. Think of things like your schedules, things that you come back to that ground you, like what grounds you. These are the themes that will be really activated during this new moon. And I feel like there's this window of opportunity for you to explore those things, really explore, and I invite you to even visualize what could be within those realms of your life. But it'll also be important to consider that Mercury will also be retrograde, also in Aries, in the same sign of the sun and moon. And so it will also be transiting your 6th house. And so the way that I like to, the sort of analogy that I like to give is this new moon is like this, if you'd imagine this doorway, this like glimpse, this window of what could be, of like this direction that you likely feel energized and called to go down, this because this will all be in the sign of Aries, this fire sign of action, initiating, being cardinal, you know, taking the first step. And you're going down this path, right? And you're like, I'm ready to do it. But there's these clothes and furniture in the way. There's these obstacles. There might be a few, maybe not a lot, but a few obstacles in your way. And you're like, oh my gosh, what is this? That is my analogy for Mercury retrograde in the same sign, in that you'll likely feel called to take this initiative within these steps, especially in the spring, you know. For you guys, this is great. For my Scorpio friends, especially this being springtime, I feel like y'all are going to be the #1 spring cleaning, like spring refresh type people. But you also might notice some hiccups, some stagnation because of Mercury retrograde, especially over the next 25 days up until April 25th. But it'll be important to remember that any sort of hiccups that you have, they're nothing to be afraid of, because they are ultimately karmically tied to lessons that you are being called to learn. And in the same way of this analogy, you're going down this path and you're like excited, but there's all this stuff in the way. You clearly know, I should have cleaned that up. That's my lesson. I was supposed to do that and I didn't do it. And in that same way, these mercurial, you know, hiccups or stagnations or issues that we might experience. And again, you can go back to the beginning of my video where I talk about the general overview of how Mercury retrograde will show up. When it's happening in this house for you, in this 6th house, you might notice hiccups when it comes to creating structure in your life. Maybe you already have structure. Maybe you have certain routines, or maybe you have certain things that ground you and you're looking to expand upon them or just go back to them in some way, especially in the midst of eclipse and retrograde season. You might experience some issues within those spaces, but ultimately those issues are lessons for you. And so the best thing that you can do is really pause and ask yourself, if you have anything that causes frustration or like makes you internalize things kind of, and you feel like this sort of stagnation within yourself, it's pausing to ask, like, is there a lesson here? Is there something that maybe I didn't notice before that I'm being called to really pay attention to now? If you approach it from that perspective, I think that will make things a lot more smooth around this time, my Scorpio sun, moon, and rising friends. So next, we also see that Mars will be conjuncting with Saturn. And in general, this is a transit that brings an air of seriousness, a sense of duty, of responsibility to things. It's really the type of transit that initiates or ushers in an experience that asks you to walk the walk in alignment with your talk, and step up to the plate, rise to the occasion. And this transit will be happening in Pisces. Like Mars and Saturn will be in the sign of Pisces, so this will be transiting your 5th house. And your 5th house is all about your inner child, your self-expression, your creativity, parent-child dynamics and things like that. And I think that will likely manifest for you guys, Scorpio sun, moon, and rising, in that you might have experiences where you ask yourself, like, man, like, when was the last time that I was creative? Like, when was the last time, like, who are the people in my life where my inner child comes out effortlessly? I feel like you might have experiences like that where you're being called to take it a lot more seriously, to like express yourself, to have a bit of courage in allowing your inner world to flow through, whether that be, especially considering that this new moon is transiting your 6th house, which is very personal. It has to do with your routine structure in your life. It can also, what I'm getting is like asking, if you're redecorating your home, for example, and you're creating, organization, you're creating that organization, that 6th house Virgo energy that, the sun, moon, and Mercury are transiting right now. And it's almost like you're asking yourself, like, when am I going to put up my artwork? When am I going to put up the artwork that I want? And so I feel like around this time, there's going to be an air of seriousness to how you hold space for your inner world, how you hold space for your own creativity. I feel like, especially with there being a new chapter coming in with this new moon, you might notice it might be spotlighted spaces where maybe people are judging you, or you feel like you need to hide certain aspects of yourself. But with Mars and Saturn conjuncting in this area, I think that you will kind of have a bit of clarity around, like, you know what? Like, I want to be myself. I want to show up fully as myself and be myself right now. And if that makes people uncomfy, then so be it. But I'm going to take this seriously because my life is my life. I only have one life. I think that there's going to be things that come up that sort of initiate that thought process for you. And finally, we'll see that Venus will be sextiling Pluto also at the time of this lunation, and that will be activating your 6th house of, inner and outer balance, your sense of responsibility, routine, like mentioned before, but also your 4th house of your family, your siblings, your interpersonal security, like what makes you feel secure. Actually, let me back up. So in general, Venus sextiling Pluto is all about transformation within your relationships, and these are going to be transiting houses that have to do with your personal relationship with yourself, like what makes you grounded, what makes you feel grounded in who you are and grounded in like your life, and brings calm. Think of like nesting, you know what I mean? Like nourishing yourself, nourishing your body, nourishing your home, but also your family dynamics. I think that there might be some changes happening with your family, Scorpio sun, moon, and rising friends. There might be, something happening there where maybe you're feeling called to speak your truth. You might be called to set some boundaries. That's what's coming up, I feel like, of really aligning yourself with what matters to you, and what grounds you and what nourishes you, while also holding space for your family and your interpersonal world. That concludes my reading for my Scorpio Sun, Moon, and Rising friends. If you like this and in general, be sure to hit the like button and let me know. This is the first video that I'm doing with these personalized horoscopes. And yeah, I will see you in the next one. Hello, hello, and greetings to my Sagittarius Sun, Moon, and Rising friends. So this will be your eclipse horoscope. And what's interesting is that this new moon and eclipse will be transiting your 5th house of your inner child, your self-expression, your creativity, and sort of like parent-child dynamics. And I think that this will be a very interesting new moon for you in that way, in that, like, if you look at, generally speaking, eclipses in general are, solar eclipses are amplified versions of new moons. So we're having this very potent, you know, sort of doorway being opened for us, this potent opportunity of starting a new chapter in a lot of ways. And it's going to be involving how you show creatively. Like it's going to be involving your courage. And I think that it will likely be initiating 5 days leading up to 5 days following. And really it's going to be initiating this new chapter over the next few months of what does it look like for you to fully embody your inner child, you know, like as we get older, we can tend to really stifle a lot of that stuff, right? For professionalism, for likability, for socialization in general in our societies. And I feel like for you, Sagittarius, Sun, Moon, and Risings, there's going to be this general sort of theme around like your creative expression, you know, just holding space for that more silly, open, creative, like unfiltered side of you to flow through in a lot of ways. But it's important to also remember that Mercury will be retrograde in Aries in the same, and transiting the same house, the same 5th house of all of those things. So it'll be important to remember that, you know, there might be some hiccups there. And if you experience some stagnation, it's okay. An analogy that I like to give, that I've been, you know, giving for all signs, but custom, you know, to each house that these planets are transiting, is that this new moon is like this, you know, cosmic, karmic doorway. It's really amplified because of the eclipse, right? And so it's like, if you imagine that there's this door open, this glimpse of what could be, and you're like, I'm going to walk through that door. I'm excited. Like I'm ready to sort of start this new chapter, set intentions, and walk in alignment with how I hold space for my creativity in one way or another, hold space for, you know, my own personality to just flow through, allowing and not being afraid to be the center of attention sometimes. And us, you know, sometimes my Sagittarius, Sun, Moon, and Rising friends, like really recognize, like, you know what, it's okay for me to talk. It's okay for me to express myself. And you see that glimpse of possibility of growth within those realms, right? And you're walking down the path to get to that door, but there's all this furniture and clothes in the way, and you're like kind of tripping over it. And you're like, oh my gosh, like what's the stagnation here? That is the Mercury retrograde influences coming into play. And what I mean by that is, with Mercury retrograde in general, yes, there can be hiccups. Yes, there can be stagnations. There can be setbacks. There can be these things, but they are ultimately tied to karmic lessons that we are being called to learn right now. And considering that Mercury will be transiting your 5th house around the time of this new moon, there will be potent themes around, potent lessons around those same things that involve the new moon. So, you know, our courage, how we express ourselves, our creativity, our inner child. And so you might notice maybe with Mercury retrograde, like that might show up as being around maybe a judgmental person who's like, oh, you're doing that now? Or like, oh my gosh, like maybe saying something passive aggressive, or like kind of dimming your light a little bit, or maybe there's a situation where you put yourself out there and something happens, or you're on your way to go do something where you're maybe pitching something in a meeting, or you're asking for that raise, or you're putting yourself out there in some way, and there's a car issue, or there's a miscommunication about the time, or somebody cancels on you. All of these things, it's going to be important to remember that just like that, all the clothes and the furniture in the way that's slowing down you getting to that new door, to that door for that new chapter, or getting to that window. Those are just like those clothes in the way. You look at those clothes and you understand, like, okay, my lesson there in the stagnation is that I was supposed to clean up. Like that was my lesson there. In the same way, any sort of setbacks that you have within those realms will be lessons for you to learn. We also see that Mercury will be conjuncting with Pluto transiting your 4th house of your family. I'm looking at my notes, your family, home life, and your interpersonal security. And so considering that Mars conjuncting with Saturn brings an area of seriousness, it's definitely the type of transit that can initiate experiences or things in your life where you're being called to step up to the plate. You're being called to rise to the occasion. You're being called to have aligned steps with the things that you say that you want to do, or with the lessons that you said that you learned, or your responsibilities to others. And considering that this has to do with your family, your interpersonal life, I think that you might experience some things or things might happen that involve you to rush to your family, to really be there for somebody in your life, in your more immediate family, chosen family, or your interpersonal community. And it could be something small, or big, it's definitely going to be something that involves your family, your interpersonal life, and how you respond to your duties, to your responsibilities, to your promises to others. And it's going to feel a bit serious. So if you notice that there's an opportunity for you to show up for somebody, know that that's tied to the Saturn-Mars conjunction happening right now. And finally, we'll see that Venus will be sextiling Pluto, which will be activating your 5th house, again, of your inner child, your self-expression, your creativity, but also your 3rd house of communication, information exchange, and learning, also like networking. Considering that in general, Venus sextiling Pluto is all about transformations within relationships, I think that you might notice that there might be a transformation within you that influences your relationships, and it will likely involve things that you learn. You might notice some like revelations coming to play. And this transformation having to do with some new information that you learn, maybe about yourself or others, but ultimately it's going to be tied to you stepping into your courage in one way or another. And generally, again, Venus sextiling Pluto is about some sort of change or transformation within your relationship. So yeah, be cognizant of that at this time. But that concludes my reading for you. So I hope that you enjoyed this reading, and I'd love to hear your feedback in the comment section. Be sure to hit like to support my work. And I also started a brand new series where I talk about it's like a weekly horoscope reading, basically. I talk about the transits happening for the week ahead. I post it every Sunday. So be sure to check out my latest video on that. And yeah, I'll see y'all in the next one. Hello and greetings to my Capricorn Sun, Moon, and Rising friends. This will be your horoscope for the upcoming Aries Eclipse and New Moon. So this Aries Eclipse and New Moon will be transiting your 4th house of your family, your interpersonal security, and your home life. So that means that it will likely be ushering in a new chapter that has to do with those aspects of your life. I think that what first comes to mind is that you might notice you in your life, or someone in your family might be welcoming in a new family member, whether that's a baby, or maybe somebody's getting married, or somebody's finally introducing people to the family. But there's this air that I'm feeling of like expansion. I don't know, it's just what comes to mind. But we also see that eclipses in general are considered these amplified versions of new moon. So it's like this cosmic, karmic door that's opening for you, specifically within the realms of your 4th house aspect. So like looking at what is your interpersonal security, like when you go home, who do you live with? Do you live with anybody? Like, what's the dynamic of your home? Like, is your home comfy? Do you feel safe there? All of these themes are things that you can pour your energy into and maybe intention set for a new chapter or to expand upon or within at this time. We also see that Mercury will also be retrograde in Aries, transiting the same house, the same 4th house, influencing the same thing. So for you, especially when it comes to mercurial sort of lessons that are happening around this time, they will be around your interpersonal relational dynamics. If you notice any stagnation, setbacks, or miscommunication, or things like that, stagnation, a lot of that stuff will have to do with your home life, your interpersonal life, your personal space, where you call your refuge, your home base. And also like the standing within your interpersonal, more intimate personal relationship. Think about even family dynamics. Like this might be a potent time for setting boundaries within your family, Maybe they're taking up a little bit too much of your personal space, or maybe, like I said, there could be an introduction to the family, I feel like, or there could be some type of shift where there's an announcement of like, oh, hey, these people that were integral to your life for so long, they're moving, or you're moving, or something like that. There's going to be something having to do with that. There might be even a gathering, but there's going to be a new chapter coming in involving those things. An analogy that I like to give in relation to this is that, like, if the new moon, this new cosmic opportunity, this amplified window for creating a new paradigm, creating a new start, letting go of old things to hold space for the new, intention setting, and riding this eclipse wave in that way, if you'd imagine that that's a doorway, that's like a glimpse into what could be, and you're walking and you're deciding, I'm walking through that doorway. You know, this is all happening in Aries, by the way. Sun, Moon, and Mercury are transiting Aries, this cardinal sign of being in action, you know, ruled by Mars. It's all about initiating, speaking our truths. Like, say you're going down and you're like, you know what, I am going to do that thing. I am going to maybe speak my truth within my family. I think that could be a really big thing for you guys, for my Capricorn, Sun, Moon, and Rising friends. But say you're walking down it, right? And there's all this like furniture and clothes in your way and you're like tripping over it. That's my analogy for Mercury retrograde, and that on this path of growth and on this path of maybe things coming up having to do with your relationships, your family, your home, your personal life, there might be hiccups in that space. And if you look at like the general mercurial retrograde themes of there being hiccups, setbacks, stagnation, these issues, and you're curious, like, where is that going to happen in my life? It will be likely happening within those spaces where maybe there's a miscommunication among the family or among your partner, or in your, whether it's extended family or more immediate, or maybe there's some issues within your home. Like there could literally be like an electrical issue or something having to do with the water or something like that. Whether any of those things happen, it's important to remember that any sort of hiccups that you experience that are tied to this Mercury retrograde, they're all tied to karmic lessons that you are being called to learn. So going back to that analogy about like there being clothes and like furniture in your way of getting to where you want to go into this new chapter, going down this path, looking at this analogy, you know, like when you're stepping over the clothes and furniture, you can immediately look at it and think, yeah, I needed to clean that up. I should have cleaned that up. That's my immediate lesson that I see there. In that same way, if you notice anything coming up around this time, just remember that it's likely tied to an important lesson that you're being called to learn. And one of the best things that you can do is literally like write down, pause, and process anything that happened, anything that caused you to have frustration or anger or confusion in any way, especially when it comes to like communication, travel, electronics, all things out of air, you know, information exchange, any of those things, especially within the realm of the fourth house of your family and your home, siblings as well. Siblings are a really big thing. Remember that it's tied to that. And really, if you're open to what the lessons could be, if you experience that stuff, that is the game changer. That is what will actually aid and, in my opinion, potentially even accelerate and amplify this new chapter in happening, because the universe is really asking you to pause and pay attention to these things. And the thing too, like I try to really emphasize this with retrogrades in general. Just because there's a retrograde doesn't mean that your life is going to be doom and gloom. It doesn't guarantee that. Oftentimes these setbacks, again, are tied to lessons that you might need to learn. And that might mean that maybe you have already learned some of these lessons. Like maybe you have already grown in a lot of ways. And maybe you already feel kind of grounded in where you're at in your family and home life. So that's my forecast, especially when it comes to the retrograde and the new moon. My Capricorn, Sun, Moon, and Rising friends, we also see that Mars will be conjuncting Saturn in Pisces, transiting your third house of communication, information exchange, and all things out of air. And the fact that it's transiting this house, you know, and this house is ruled by Mercury, which is in retrograde right now, there will definitely be this sort of seriousness, this sort of like, there might be a situation where you're feeling called to like step up to the table, rise to the occasion, and really take aligned steps with what you say that you want to grow into, like with what you say, like really, you know, third house of communication, like really walking the walk. Like there might be a situation where you're being called to reflect on, like, do my actions align with my words? That's going to be a really big thing for you, because we have Mars, you know, this planet that's all about action. And it's the ruling planet of Aries, which the Sun, Moon, and Mercury will be in, by the way. So very potent energy here, very intertwined. And it's having this conjunction with Saturn, the planet that's considered the strict teacher in astrology. It's all about your duty, your responsibility, maturity, growing up. You know what I mean? Growing up in a lot of ways. And considering that it'll be in the third house of communication, of learning, of intellectual pursuits, information exchange, it seems like quite literally it's going to be about walking the walk, taking aligned steps with what you have been saying. And also like looking at and paying attention to maybe things that get exposed in other people, of like maybe some people have been making promises and it's not aligned with their actual actions, and really reflecting on those things. In general, this new moon, though new moons are all about kind of like rest and reflection, there's definitely going to be this air of like being action oriented. Again, like taking aligned steps, because we see the sun, moon, and Mercury will be in Aries, this very action-oriented sign. So, and considering that it's starting a new chapter, you know, and this conjunction is all about action, I think that that's really interesting. And finally, we'll see that Venus will be sextiling Pluto, activating your 4th house of, you know, family, your personal life, your home life, things like that, interpersonal relationships. But it'll also be activating your 2nd house of finances, sensory pleasures, and your relationships. So I think that that's really interesting. And it's, again, like generally speaking, before getting into the houses and the signs and all this stuff, Venus sextiling Pluto is a type of transit that can really usher in and initiate transformation and change within our relationships, right? And so considering that this will also be activating, the 4th and 2nd house, there's going to be potential changes and transformations specifically within your family relationships, family, siblings. Like, I'm telling you, I wonder if somebody might announce a pregnancy, somebody might announce we're getting married, somebody might announce a divorce, somebody might announce something within your family. Somebody might be moving, coming in. There's going to be a slight shift in the family space. And this also might involve finances in some way, or your home, you know, like your, like, the physical manifestation of things, like literally moving, actually. So definitely look out for that. Be cognizant of that. And again, like with transformation, there's an asking for and a request for honesty. And that's why I think that there's going to be revelations coming out, whether that maybe be with you guys and you're finally announcing something. If you're thinking of a time to announce something, you know, a new moon, an eclipse is a potent time to like start this new chapter and kind of create this sort of hyper sigil, this like big announcement, this big image to people of how things will be going moving forward. So I find that to be really interesting. But with all of that said, that concludes my reading for you, Capricorn, Sun, Moon, and Rising friends. So if this resonated with you, or if you liked it in general, if you like these type of videos, be sure to hit the like button and comment down below. Let me know what you think. Also, I started a new series where I'm doing like weekly forecast readings, and I recently released one. They come out every Sunday, or they hopefully will. I'm seeing if it'll work with my schedule and blah, blah, blah. But if that interests you, be sure to check that out. But with that said, I will see y'all in the next one. Hello and greetings to my Aquarius, Sun, Moon, and Rising friends. This will be your horoscope for the new moon and eclipse happening in Aries. So this lunation will be transiting your 3rd house of communication, siblings, information exchange, learning, and really all things that of air. You know, 3rd house is ruled by Mercury, and we also have Mercury retrograde, which we will be talking about. But considering that it will be transiting this house, it'll be very interesting. I think that considering that eclipses are amplified versions of new moons, like it's not just any new moon, it's really offering a very amplified and potent opportunity for stepping into a new chapter of your life, closing something else out. These eclipses in general can present sometimes unexpected change, unexpected transformation in ways that we didn't even realize, that are always karmically tied to things that we are being called to step into and grow into. And considering that it will be transiting this house, and it has heavily to do with Mercury, and Mercury will be in retrograde, transiting the same house for you guys, I think it'll be really potently felt, this retrograde, but also the retrograde's relationship to the lunation. And what I mean by that is, you will likely notice opportunities or experiences that highlight this potential of a new chapter for you when it comes to exploring and growing within your communication and learning. I think that you're going to be learning something, maybe starting a class, maybe starting even like a YouTube series. You're going to be maybe finding a new resource that's allowing you to dive deeper into something. And I think that it'll also involve like being able to communicate and talk to people about it. It might be through community as well. And you just learning something, and it's opening your mind in a certain way where you're just like, a whole new world is opening up to you when it comes to something new, a new subject that you could be learning. I think that this can also manifest as like travel. You might be buying tickets for travel or planning something with travel, something that has to do with like expanding the mind in some way. I think that that'll be showing up. And I think that you'll be seeing 5 days leading up to 5 days following the day of. It'll be very clear for you in that way. But it's also important to remember that Mercury will also be going retrograde in Aries, also transiting your third house of communication, information exchange, networking, learning. The best way, this is a good analogy that I like to give. If the eclipse is like this big cosmic doorway, and it's a literal doorway, and you're like, you know what, I'm gonna walk through that door. I can clearly see where I can potently set these intentions, and like there's experiences that I've had that have like pushed me to like maybe wanting to make a change in this way, or like kind of grow into something or start something fresh, especially when it comes to who I talk to, who I learn from, you know, how I expand my awareness in a lot of ways. Say you're walking towards that door, right? And there's a bunch of clothes and furniture in the way. And you're like, oh my gosh, like there's all these there's these obstacles, literal obstacles in my way to this new chapter. But you understand, well, that it's kind of, this is a setback, but this is also a lesson that I was supposed to clean this up. You know what I mean? You clearly see what the lesson is behind the obstacle. That's my analogy for Mercury retrograde and its connection with this eclipse, especially for you guys, for you, my Aquarius sun, moon, and rising friends, because it's transiting the third house. It's strongly tied to Mercury. Mercury is a ruler of that. And what I mean by that is, in general, with these mercurial sort of like setbacks, stagnations, anything like that that comes from this retrograde that I talked about at the introduction of this video, with any of that already happening, it's likely going to occur within these third house realms, right? Of how we communicate, how we learn. Like, I think a big thing that it's going to show up as for y'all will be miscommunication, like a potential miscommunication in some way. But no matter what, if there's any sort of hiccup, just understand that it's not out of nowhere. It's not like the worst end of the world thing. It's really all about the fact that these hiccups, issues, stagnation, setbacks are all tied to karmic lessons that you are being called to learn. And the best thing that you can do is, if you notice that there are moments where you feel frustrated, misunderstood, there are hiccups, you misunderstand somebody else, or maybe you feel triggered by somebody else. You know, all of this is happening in the sign of Aries. This is a very fiery, emotional, passionate, initiating, action-oriented sign. It'll be important to pause, process, and even write it out. Like, ask, like, this is upsetting me, what's my lesson? Like, really being in that mindset, because if you can have that mindset or philosophy and approach to things, it will be incredibly helpful, and in my opinion could potentially even accelerate and really bolster and support the new chapter and the new era, the new phase that you might be stepping into when it comes to your learning, your communication. I feel like you might even like make new friends or like meet people who just expand your ability to kind of express yourself as well. But yeah, that's definitely what is coming up. We will also see that Mars will be conjuncting Saturn in Pisces, transiting your second house of finances, material goods, material things, sensory pleasures, and romance. I think that that's really interesting. So considering in general, backing up a bit, Mars conjuncting Saturn, that's the type of transit that really initiates experiences where you're clearly being called to step up to the plate. You're clearly being called to make sure that your walk matches your talk. You're being called to step up to the duties and promises that you have and step into that responsibility in a lot of ways. And considering that it's transiting your second house of finances, I think that it will, around the time of this lunation, there will be topics and conversations around your finances. Maybe you'll be learning something having to do with your finances, and maybe you'll be expanding within that space. I think that that could be really, really beautiful, of like you aligning with these Mars Saturn energy of like feeling energized, taking aligned steps of like, you know what, I am ready to maybe like expand my financial literacy and my financial health. You know, those are the type of things that can be a really potent subject to be learning right now and stepping into this new chapter with, because the thing about Saturn is that Saturn is considered the strict teacher. It's here to give you lessons, and maybe you don't like the way that the lessons are given. Maybe it's through some tough love in some ways, but they're lessons nonetheless that we are being called to learn. So for my Aquarius sun, moon, and rising friends, definitely pay attention to that. And finally, we will see that Venus will be sextiling Pluto, activating your third house of communication, you know, all things learning, just like I mentioned before, but also activating your first house, which is your sense of self. The first house is ruled by Aries, you know, so your ability to advocate for yourself as well, you know, speak up for yourself, have courage, things like that, take initiative as well. And so considering that Venus sextiling Pluto is all about transformation within your relationships, for y'all, you will likely experience or have some type of situation that might spark this sort of calling to reflect on you and how you communicate your needs, you know, like how, and also learning about yourself. I think there will be a lot of learning about yourself, and there'll be this transformation within your relationships that has to do with your own self-image. Not as much about the other person, but your own self-image and how you communicate that to people, how you communicate who you are and where you're at. You know, letting people know where you're at is very important in a relationship. And it'll be through that that you might experience some transformation and change there. But yeah, that is your reading for this eclipse time and the transits surrounding it. If you like this video, be sure to hit the like button and comment down below if you like stuff like this, if you want to see more of it. This is my first one where I'm doing customized readings in this way, customized horoscopes for a lunation. But yeah, I will see you in the next one, and I'm sending you my love. Peace. Hello, hello, my Aries sun, moon, and rising friends. This will be your horoscope for the new moon and eclipse happening in Aries. This one will be transiting your second house of finances, of romance, of sensory pleasures, the material world, structure, consistency. I find that to be really interesting. I think that specifically within your finances, you might notice like an unavoidable and unignorable new chapter within your finances. And this can be tied to maybe your career, maybe something that's changing there. This can also be the fruits of your labor finally coming up in a lot of ways, but this also might show up where you feel you have some type of experience that inspires you to dive deeper into your financial literacy. I think that that could be a really big thing for you, my Pisces sun, moon, and rising friends. But yeah, like and the other thing to consider too is that with Mercury going retrograde, also transiting Aries and also transiting your second house, the best way that I like to, the analogy that I like to give for this relationship with Aries sun, moon, and Mercury, you know, all three of these astral bodies being in this sign and all three of them transiting your second house, is that if this new moon in general, like we know that eclipses are these potent, oh my gosh, my cat is meowing so loud. I don't know if you heard it, but like she literally sounded like somebody calling for help. Oh my gosh. Anyway, if you'd imagine like this eclipse, which is considered this like amplified version of a new moon, so this really potent cosmic karmic doorway, this new chapter, eclipses in general are associated with like drastic change, sometimes unexpected shifts in our lives. And sometimes we feel inspired to do those things as well. We have these experiences that clearly point out this is the direction that you need to go, and this is the chapter that you're being called to go in. And considering that it's in the second house, if you'd imagine that as like a literal doorway, this like vision of what could be, this vision of this direction that you're being called to go down, and you're actually like down to do it. You're ready to do it. You're in this action-oriented mode, considering that the sun and moon are in Aries, this very action-oriented fire cardinal sign. And you're like, I'm gonna walk down this road. Like I'm being pushed down this road. I have these experiences that are calling for me to enter this new chapter. Let me go down it. But as you're going down it, there's all these obstacles. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm being pulled in this direction, but there's furniture and there's clothes in the way, and it's a whole mess, and it's literally causing stagnation. It's causing obstacles for me to get through that door. Those obstacles, that mess is Mercury retrograde. And I use that analogy because with Mercury retrograde, just like you see that mess and you intuitively know, okay, this is stagnation, this is an issue, but I also know this is a lesson for me to learn, and that I need to clean up. I clearly need to clean this up. I should have done it before, and now I'm in the middle of something and it's messing up what I'm trying to do. In that same way, Mercury retrograde, these mercurial sort of like setbacks and stagnations and issues that we might experience, they are very much tied to that. They're very much tied to lessons, these karmic lessons that we are being called to learn within the house that Mercury is transiting, which for you is the second house of finances, of our finances, romantic relationships, and the material world, your home, your material goods, things like that. And seeing that there might be a new shift, a shift within that space. Maybe you might be changing banks. You might be changing the way that you approach your finances. Maybe you find out a bill that you didn't realize you had, or maybe you realize that you actually paid off this debt that you didn't know, and now you have more of a disposable income. Any of these things that pop up, these drastic shifts that can happen with Mercury being retrograde, you might experience obstacles within those spaces. But it's important to remember that if you do have them, they are ultimately tied to important karmic lessons that you are being called to learn at this time. And it'll be so helpful, incredibly helpful, to really pause and write these things out. Write down if there's any times where you've noticed you felt really frustrated, or you felt a setback, or there was like, you felt this and you internalized this thing that happened outside of yourself, having to do with second house themes of like your relationships as well. There could be definitely a change in your romantic relationships too, Pisces, Sun, Moon, and Rising, in that you might meet somebody new, or you might enter like a new phase in your relationship, and you're realizing that it's becoming very clear of like, oh, okay, we left the honeymoon phase, or like, oh, okay, we're in this new phase of our relationship where we're getting even deeper into things, or we need to get deeper into things in order to maintain our balance, or things like that. And there might be obstacles that are the sort of medium for you to learn that. And that's ultimately tied to Mercury retrograde. We also see that Mars will be conjuncting Saturn, transiting your first house, which is the house of your sense of self, your identity. This is also the first house of new beginnings, you know, and your physical health. And so I find that to be really interesting, that Mars conjuncting Saturn, this transit that really is calling, will be initiating and bringing in, ushering in experiences where we might feel called to step up to the plate, to rise to the occasion, to make sure that we are walking the walk in alignment with the talk. You know what I mean? It's really interesting to see that this will be transiting your first house, my Pisces, Sun, Moon, and Rising friends, because I think that it'll likely show up or manifest as there being experiences that call you to ask, like, I say that I'm this person. I say that I believe in these things. I say that I want these things. I say that this is who I am. I say that this is my self-image, but are my actions aligned with those things? Are they truly aligned with those things? And you actually could potentially feel like a really potent calling to be in action. You know, this involves Mars. Mars is the ruling planet of Aries. You know, it's the planet of taking action, being in action. And you might likely actually feel a strong energy, this strong shift that helps you with starting a new chapter in alignment with the new moon, in aligning your beliefs and what you believe, how you believe in yourself with your actual action. So be cognizant of that, and be sure, don't be afraid of it. Like, understand that ultimately you're being asked. Saturn is considered the strict teacher. It's a teacher. The lessons that it gives might not always make us feel warm and comfy inside, but they are lessons that we are being called to learn nonetheless. So it'll be really helpful to pay attention to any sort of situations where those things pop up for you. And finally, we'll see that around the time of this lunation, Venus will be sextiling Pluto, and they'll be activating your second house of, you know, finances, relationships, romantic relationships, material things, but also your 12th house of solitude, of spirituality, and of your emotions, and namely of healing, a lot of healing. And considering that in general, Venus sextiling Pluto is really all about transformation, having to do with your relationships and changes that happen within that. I think that it'll likely manifest for you as maybe realizing that you, in some relationships, there was a distraction there that was more material, and that you're ready for transformation and growth when it comes to the deeper emotions, the deeper shadow side of things, bringing those things to light, processing them. And I think that that will really be helpful around this time. I think that it can also show up as your relationship to money, your relationship to material things. That's what's coming to mind as well. And that potentially transforming, especially considering that this is a new moon, you know, we're stepping into a new chapter. That could involve, in the process of starting a new chapter, is starting with you, with who you are as a person and your relationship to things like that, how you accumulate things. Also, like, think about Amazon, how you spend your money, like your relationship with consumerism maybe as well. These are the type of things that could be popping up around the time of this new moon. So be sure to stay cognizant of it. But with all of that said, that wraps up my reading for you, my Pisces, Sun, Moon, and Rising friends. I hope that you enjoyed this video. And if you did, the number one way to support my work is to hit the like button. And if you haven't already, subscribe. I also started a new series where I'm doing like weekly horoscope readings, and I love if you check that out. But besides that, I will see you in the next one.